What do you like about being older?
I don't like anything about being older, if I'm honest. I mean, I like that.
You must like yourself a lot. You seem like you like yourself.
I like myself okay, but I feel such joy knowing that I can give my children what my parents never could. I get such a kick out of that.
Hello and welcome back. I'm Catherine Fairweather, here with the youngest guest ever on the Third Act podcast, 61-year young Susannah Constantine. After years in the limelight as a knit girl, and then part of the phenomenally successful What Not to Wear TV show with Trini Woodall, Susannah retired into the wilderness to focus on marriage and bringing up her family, dealing also with the addiction, which she boldly relates in her memoirs, Ready for Absolutely Nothing. We sat down in the cinema at Orient's to talk about her life, her passion for cold water swimming, and as an influencer on Instagram, where she's not afraid to appear to her 165,000 followers in a state of undress and dishevelment. Susannah, it's great to see you after all these years.
I know, Catherine, I was trying to think how long it's been, and I reckon it's probably been 30 years. How things have changed.
You're a total babola. Actually, slightly contrary to the sort of frumpier image you like to embrace on your Instagram, your huge following on Instagram feed. But anyway, we'll go back to that. I'm really enjoying your life in 3 acts in the paperback of your brilliant book, Ready for Absolutely Nothing. Why did you write this book? I mean, have you been thinking about writing a book for a long time?
No, not really. It's a kind of, it's a memoir, I guess you call it. And I'd always been asked, would I write a memoir? And to be honest, I never thought I'd stoop that low. But here we are. I did stoop that low. And the reason I did it was because during lockdown, I did another podcast with this guy, and I inadvertently made reference to being a recovering alcoholic, and I'd never gone public about it before.
In the podcast it came out?
In the podcast, yeah, and I'm so open about it. My name's Susannah and I'm an alcoholic. Anyway, it came out, and then it sort of, lit up, and I got asked to do loads of interviews about it, which at the time I was very happy to do that, because I noticed there were so many reports in the news about how women in particular were struggling and how the percentage of alcohol abuse had gone up
in lockdown.
And I know what it's like to be in that place, and especially during lockdown where we were isolated anyway, so that would have further compacted your own feelings of isolation, guilt, shame, anxiety. And I just thought, if I stand up, hold my hand up and said, look, guys, I'm the same as you, and I've come out the other side, just for today, it might help women feel less alone, and women in particular. And so that's why I did it. And then I started to think about, okay, why, was I born an alcoholic? And I started looking back at my life, because my mum was an alcoholic and so was my grandmother. But for my mum, I think it was self-medication, because she was severely bipolar. And she stopped kind of overnight. She was a secret drinker. And I remember as a child and as a teenager thinking, I will never do that. And that led me on to thinking about my life, because I'm someone who's never looked back at my life. I've only lived in the present and maybe looked forward a little bit. And that's one of the gifts, I think, having a parent who is ill or with a mental health disorder, is that you only have the day. So as a child, I'd wake up in the morning and I'd think, okay, first thing would be panic. How's mum going to be today? Is she going to be on a low? Is she going to be on a high? Will she have had a suicide attempt? So all I had was that moment of safety, of that moment when you're kind of free from knowledge, free from something happening, that moment. And that taught me to live in the present, I think. So that was, I choose to look at her illness as, the benefits that I got from it.
Did you have therapy as a teenager or in your early 20s?
No.
So you you were never really encouraged to look back and analyse the fear or pain that was obviously latent from dealing with a parent that wasn't well, until you confronted your own alcoholism, right? And then
right.
you went to AA, and then you did have to look back on your life.
Exactly right. And then, I mean, because if you think, we're the same age, and growing up in our generation, mental health, people there wasn't even such a term as mental health.
No.
So, there was no one to suggest, there was no kind of appropriate adult who might have suggested, maybe you should go and see a therapist, because it was an unknown thing. And I think it's sort of our generation, well, actually the younger generation, that have led the way and helped us to question, maybe we are a bit fucked up and maybe we could benefit from seeing someone. And so I've never delved very deeply into it, but through AA, I have learnt an awful lot. And I've also learnt an awful lot about myself through writing this book. It was a lot of...
Were they concurrent when you wrote the book? No,
I'd already got sober, but it was
how long sober, sorry?
Well, I've been sober now for 11 years.
Goodness.
And I've been going to 11 years. I had 2 magnificent relapses, which were fantastic, and early on. So yeah, that's how long. And it's been life-changing, but writing Ready for Absolutely Nothing was a series of sort of revelations to myself, because I'd forgotten all these things.
But you have an extraordinary memory. Were you mining? Did you keep diaries? I mean, how do you remember these things?
I kept no diaries, but I have an extraordinary... If I think of food
like a trigger.
Is the catalyst for my memories, because I'm so greedy. I love food. So I can remember almost everything that I've eaten in my life. And so I think of, growing up as this amazing butcher called Mr. Taylor, and I think about his sausages. I can remember every single time I ate his sausages, what happened just before and what happened after. And then my mum, one thing she did do was keep these amazing photograph albums. So I had a lot of memory from that. And then I had my sister. So there were kind of landmarks and signposts as opposed to actual memories. So I think about my home. I think about all visual. Memories come from looking at a painting that my father painted, or from a piece of furniture that I had in my bedroom when I was a kid.
You have a brilliant turn of phrase, and there are some very funny anecdotal detail about your time with the royals, when your social circle collided with Princess Margaret's because of going out with David, her son. Some of which is, I mean, you're so brave. I'm not sure I would have ever confessed to that loo scene where you talk about,
Oh yeah,
going the blockage in the loo and having to find a sort of carving knife to.
I know. Well, that was actually. I mean, my publishers weren't going to allow me to put that in the book because just to quickly tell the story, we were at Princess Margaret every year would do these kind of summer tours somewhere to some landmark in London, and this year it was to go to the Greenwich Maritime Museum. And there was a lunch and everything. Anyway, we were sitting down and we'd gone there in a bus. There was no outriders to press the lights or anything. We were just in this kind of coach. And we got there, we were having lunch, and Princess Margaret had disappeared for quite a long time. And I thought, fuck, where is she? So I went to go and find her. And I went into the ladies' loo. And I went into the men's loo as well, because that could have been a possibility. So I went into the ladies' loo and I said, ma'am. And she went, Susannah, is that you? And I said, yeah, it's me. Are you okay? And she sort of kicked the door open with her little shoe. And she just said, darling, will you go and get me a knife? And, like the good foot soldier, off I went, and perplexed to get her a knife. I couldn't find anything apart from this cake slice. So I took this cake slice back. And she said, have you got it? And I handed it to her. And she turned round, put her hand in the pan, and started chopping. And I said, ma'am, and she went, it just won't go down. So actually it was her extraction rather than my own. So I had to change it to my own because they weren't going to allow me
really?
to, which, is fine. But she would have loved that. And what was so amazing, I don't see that as a kind of, going to too much information about her. I see that as an indication of what an incredible woman she was, how practical, how pragmatic, how unfazed and unembarrassed she was. She was a true stalwart in
kind of
so many ways.
Earthy humour at times.
Yeah, and it was just completely matter of fact. There was a problem, and this is how she was going to deal with it. End of story. And then she handed the knife back to me.
And the other brilliant anecdote where you're, you in Balmoral with the Queen and Margaret Thatcher, and you were at a shooting party.
So we were staying at Balmoral. We went up to Balmoral in the summer when, Her Majesty would go up for her summer break, and David and I went up. And Margaret Thatcher was Prime Minister at the time. And I loved Margaret Thatcher. I didn't know anything about her politics. I was so kind of oblivious to everything going on in the world, hence the title of my book, Ready for Absolutely Nothing. I was a complete sort of political moron. But I loved her because she was a role model in terms of she was a woman who'd come from nowhere, just broken the balls of the establishment and become the first female Prime Minister. So for me, she was a role model because we didn't have any when we were growing up. So anyway, I was very excited to meet her. And we were having tea by the river in the fisherman's hut. It was just me and the Queen and Margaret Thatcher in this hut. And my opening gambit to Margaret Thatcher was, I live in Grantham. And she sort of looked, it was like I was invisible. Anyway, the Queen picked up this huge teapot, Brown Betty, and said, Susannah, would you like a cup of tea? And I put my cup out. And suddenly I saw these sort of hands emerge and grab the teapot. And I looked and it was Margaret Thatcher trying to take the teapot out of the Queen's hand. Anyway, the Queen pulled back. And there was this sort of wrestling that went on between the two of them, fighting over this teapot. And that's an extraordinary anecdote. But the ordinary truth about that was that here were the two most powerful women in the world at the time fighting over who was going to play mother. And it was as simple as that. And that's how I've kind of done my book, written the book, is I've remembered these extraordinary anecdotes with these extraordinary people at an extraordinary time, and then really brought it down to a level that we can all identify with.
Yeah, well, you wear your humiliations very, very well, I have to say, in the book, in the memoir. But I mean, the really telling point is that for our generation, it's absolutely true. We were bred as women of a certain sort of social class circle to be, well, for the marriage market. That's what your role was, wasn't it?
Totally. That was all that was expected of us, was to marry well and have children. And there's an anecdote which illustrates this perfectly, where I wanted to go to university. And I think the only one I managed to get a place in was Reading. And I thought, okay, it might be quite fun to go to university. I know a few people who have done that. And my dad said to me, darling, I think you'd be far better off learning how to make a decent beef Wellington. And that was his answer. So I had no education. I went to a shit school where they were all, girls similar to me. And we were so kind of closeted and ignorant and
encouraged to be so. We were not encouraged to think about the world outside our little bubbles.
That is so true.
In that society. I mean, I left England and went to school in Athens, which was different. But
you did the best thing. I remember thinking of you and thinking, oh my God, she's broken free. I remember thinking that, and I remember thinking, actually, that's so interesting. I remember you doing that, and I remember thinking, okay, I'm too kowtowed and codependent and people-pleasing to properly rebel, take drugs, and I left the drinking till later. So my rebellion was to go out and work and make my own money.
So your career that you said saved you in a way
Mm.
started by mistake, didn't it? When you went to New York, and then you came back and you started working for Alistair Blair, and you were able to wear fabulous clothes, and you turned into a clothes horse.
I was so lucky. That was because I worked for Giorgio Armani. I say worked for. I was a shop girl on Madison Avenue, and there was just a wonderful guy who's dead now, I think, called Pier Filippo Pieri. He did all the PR, and he suggested I get in touch with this man because I thought, oh well, I'll just go and do the same thing, be a shop girl in London. And there was this man called Peter Bertelsen who had bought the franchise for quite a few Italian designers for London, and Armani was one of them, and I went to meet him. I had no CV, I had nothing. But meanwhile, he had just taken on Alistair Blair and John Galliano and was backing them. And he had the foresight to think, okay, she is worth something because she's got a great address book. She's in the newspapers all the time. So in a way, it was like I was, I guess, an early influencer.
It girl.
Yeah, kind of it girl. And you know, that Peter changed my life. He had more influence. That meeting and him giving me that job had more influence on my life than anything else and anyone else. And he then became my father-in-law.
So is he still alive?
No, very sadly not. But I didn't know my husband, Steen, who is his middle son. I didn't meet Steen until 88 years after. But I knew both his parents really well, Peter and Prue, his mum, who's still alive and wonderful.
And as you describe marrying Steen, who sounds like, I've never met him, but he sounds like an absolutely wonderful man, a kind of anchor, was not the end, was not the sort of happy ending of this fairy tale, but really the beginning, because it enabled you to be free, to do what you wanted to do.
That's exactly, I mean, you know, most people think, him included, going into marriage is sort of go to jail and throw the key away. But for me, it was the most liberating moment. And, you know, for Steen, I remember him saying to me just after we got engaged, which I had to force him to do, he said, you know, don't go thinking that I'm going to be the breadwinner here. You know, I'm going to pay for everything, because I'm not. I thought, you fucking bastard, I've made a real mistake. And then I thought, okay, watch me. And that's when my career, you know, went even further.
So it was him pushing you a bit?
He pushed me. He pushes me all the time.
He gives you confidence and he pushes you?
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's confidence, actually.
He just makes you?
He just kind of, his respect is very important to me. And in order, in my mind, to get his respect, I need to be working. Fabulous. And also for my own self-respect, I get more respect through my work, probably, than anything else.
What about being a great mother to your 3 children?
Yeah, no, I'm a really good mother. I do hold my hand up about that. That is fantastic. And that actually now, so I would say I'm a mother first now, although my children are all young adults. I would say I'm a mother first, a wife second, and a working woman third. That order is just fine with me now.
But 10 years ago, it was the other way around. Was it career?
Yeah, but I found it hard, Catherine. You know, Trini and I were away so much. We probably were away when we were doing shows abroad. We did them all over the world, in Australia, in Israel, in Scandinavia, India. I can't remember
phenomenal.
Where else. And we were away almost 6 months of the year.
Incredible.
And that's actually when I went to therapy for the first time, because I left. My children would literally give me the finger when I left, and I'd be sobbing in the taxi going to the airport. And I had such bad separation anxiety that is actually when I went to see someone.
And were you at the beginning of Trini and Susannah? Were you drinking then?
I wasn't aware of it at the time, but looking back, I was drinking, but I was pregnant quite a lot during that time, so I never drank when I was pregnant. But I now look back, it was a phenomenal time, and, you know, Trini and I, we were so there for each other. It was, this relationship that we had was extraordinary. But I think it probably did contribute to my drinking, because I was putting across as I was sort of being someone that I wasn't truly. So now I've come out the other side. I think I'm living the life I would have done had I not had this career, which is someone who's quite introvert, likes to be alone a lot, loves solitude, loves the countryside, hates going out and being social. So I think in order to be on television and have to go to these, be TV Susannah, I think that's probably why I drank.
And do you think that the older Susannah is a person that you feel more comfortable inside than the Susannah of 21 years old Susannah? What do you like about being older, basically?
I don't like anything about being older, if I'm honest. I mean, I like that...
You must like yourself a lot. You seem like you like yourself.
I like myself okay. I mean, I'm always thinking I can do better in everything. I'm a terrible people pleaser, still that. I'm very lazy. But I feel such joy knowing that I can give my children what my parents never could. I get such a kick out of that.
Which is?
Being connected, knowing that all we are is a safety net that will catch them if they need catching. But by giving them enough rope so that when they eventually hang themselves, they're going to be able to deal with it. And having really close, relationship with my especially my daughters. That I never had anything that closeness with my mother. My mother, I didn't speak to her about anything, nothing.
Yeah. Not
a single thing. Whereas my daughters, they tell me everything. And I just think, God, that's so great. And I don't push, I just say, whatever you want to do. I know it's none of my business, or, they volunteer information.
Yeah, you say about your father that it wasn't that he didn't show affection, but he only showed it when he had time to show it.
Yeah.
And that's right. I wonder whether that sort of that people-pleasing impulse in you was because you were craving more affection. In fact, the filling the hole with drink is so classic, isn't it?
Yeah.
Trying to find
I'm sure that's right. Because wanting the other person, whoever I'm with, whether I know them very well or not, is to feel good about themselves, because I know what it felt not to have the attention. That sounds so sort of worthy. But I think there is a bit of that.
And what is the equipment? What's your technique for making people love you? Now and then, as a young person.
I think it's to shock initially. Mm-hmm. It's to shock, to say something outrageous, which, going back to the confidence thing, I think was always a weapon in my arsenal.
It's a form of flirtation in a way.
Yeah, it is. And it's I'm a terrible flirt, but only with gay men, because there are no repercussions.
But you look, I mean, the persona that you present or project on your Instagram, on your social media feed, is, if you don't mind me saying, frumpier than the real you. You're such a bloody glamour puss. So that's quite interesting that you're not afraid to embrace, being forgetful.
To look like shit and think like shit.
Yeah. Looking like, waking up in the morning and not putting on makeup and doing a sort of selfie of yourself. And yet you look $1 million. What's the secret of aging well? What are your secrets of aging well?
Well, I think the thing is, the fact that I always look like, rubbish, and I'm not frightened to look like rubbish on Instagram. I think part of that is so that when people actually see you, they think you look so much better than you do. And that's much nicer than if you put all these filters on and then you meet someone and they're like shocked. I think it's a form of protection. So it is that thing of putting yourself down before anyone else can. But the secret is, I think it's not to look in too many mirrors, and to, I know we've all aged. But I think for me, it's to have a Ferrari engine, to keep myself healthy and well inside. So if a surgeon cut me open, he would want to use every one of my organs. And that I would be more proud of than, not having so many laughter lines or...
So you look
wrinkles.
after yourself?
I really do look after myself.
You're a great fan of cold water swimming, aren't you?
Yes.
Why?
And that for anxiety. I read about it, Wim Hof before lockdown. And it kind of shocks the vagus nerve. I don't totally understand it. I just know that it works. And so...
calms you down.
It really... And I think it's so empowering. It's so... You just come out and you think, God, I did that. And especially if you're in the sea.
So has that become a sort of... After you gave up the alcohol 10 years ago, whatever, 11 years ago, did that take over... Did that become a prop, the... cold water swimming?
100%.
Really?
Yeah,
That's
you're so right. It's another kind, not an addiction, but it's I guess it is a prop, because for me it's like I want to do something that's difficult to be proud of myself, but also to have something to talk about and to, it was a prop just because so few people did it, not because of the health benefits to begin with. And then I realised the health benefits.
And then, you're someone who has eschewed, unlike most people in the industry that you worked in the fashion industry, you're not an advocate for sort of tweakments or doing stuff to your face, or you're natural. You're all natural. I'm all natural, yes. So you're not scared of the aging process. You embrace it.
I don't embrace it. I hate it. But if I'm honest, I just sort of can't be bothered. And it's so expensive. It's so time-consuming. And so I think that's basically why. And also, you go and have work done or whatever it is, and we just all end up looking the same. You could be 35 or you could be 75. And you just all look the same age. So I just find it a very strange thing. And, the young women who go and do it now, the young girls, it's all about sex for them. It's about turning themselves into these sort of blow-up sex dolls.
Prepubescent girl. It's just bizarre, isn't it?
But it's all about getting your boobs bigger, getting your lips bigger. It's all about looking like a porn star.
Wow. What do you say to your daughters?
I just say, don't be fucking stupid.
Yeah.
If they say, oh, my nose, I said, you've got a perfect nose. Just don't be ridiculous. You don't need to.
Do you think after, we were talking about your life in your mother's time and how there wasn't a role for women, but do you think it's equally difficult for our daughters' generations, the sexualized world they live in, that maybe we didn't have to put up with that, being this sort of pornographization of their lives?
I think it's very difficult for them, and I think you're right. I haven't thought about that. I think I'm proud of my girls because they are very, like a lot of all their friends actually. They just want to look, like they live on the streets really, and there's a kind of ease between the sexes that there maybe wasn't in our exactly time, right,
which I think is so lovely.
It's wonderful. Yeah.
Even despite the sort of sexualization and the pornification, I think there is this much easier between the sexes. And there are roles for women now that there used not to be.
Everyone puts down this generation. You hear about it, you read about it. But I think they're extraordinary because they're so, like you say, there's a breakdown between the sexes. But they're so interesting. They're so much worldly than we ever were. And they're more empathetic.
They are.
And they...
more thoughtful.
Totally. And none of them have the same opinion as each other. They're so dogmatic in their beliefs. And they don't care if their best friend doesn't feel the same. I would be like following and agreeing with everyone. We sit around the table with their friends and have massive arguments.
That's good.
Which is so... that is great. Inspiring and wonderful.
So they're not afraid to debate a subject, your children, between each other and disagree with each other?
Not at all.
Because that's not always the case, actually. But I think that's fantastic.
Yeah.
And is there still a girl in you, do you think? Are you still in touch with your young, teenage self?
Yes.
Do you feel, what age, I often ask people what age they feel they were most themselves, and
I'm definitely most myself now. I have the
Yeah.
confidence to be
Yeah.
myself.
Yeah.
Yeah. Definitely
That's
myself.
interesting. I was 33. I think I've never moved on from 33.
Yeah. I
But
think
you feel the age you should be, that you are.
Yeah, I think I'm most myself now.
Yeah.
I
So that must give you.
that's
That's
so
good.
interesting. You're raising so many interesting points. Yeah. I think I am the age I'm more myself now than I've ever been.
So that must give you a huge sense of sort of contentment and inner happiness if you feel that way.
It gives me freedom. It gives me
Great.
freedom from trying to be something I'm not. I still have insecurities and worries and I have anxiety. But yeah, no, I'm.
It's a big thing, feeling free. Actually,
It is, isn't it?
Really is.
I mean, I'm still working on it, but
what are you doing next? Actually working, talking about work, what are you going to do next?
I don't know, Catherine. I'll just see what comes along, really. I mean, I'm an accidental influencer, 61-year-old influencer.
You're far too young for this programme, by the way, this podcast. You're still a baby. You are our baby.
Okay, well, that's lovely to be called that. And I've got another book in me, but it's too close to the one.
You don't want to talk about it yet?
I don't know I've got 3 ideas. I think I'll go back to fiction.
And so now, thinking forward, which is something that you don't know, you don't think back, you do think forward. But let's try and imagine we're at, this is your last supper. It's a bit of a grim thought. But so who would you love to have, because I know you think about food, so I'd love you to think about what you'd like to be eating at this last supper, and who of the many famous people, celebrity people you have, or maybe dead people, I don't know, who would you invite to this last supper? What music would be the soundtrack of your life, and what would we be eating?
So we'd be eating probably prawn cocktail.
Very 70s.
Very 70s. Prawn cocktail, Christmas lunch, turkey, bread sauce, Brussels sprouts, sweet corn fritters, roast potatoes, And then for pudding, probably creme caramel made by Mrs. A, who was like my surrogate mum. And the people around the table would be Mrs. A.
Oh, what happened to Mrs. A?
She died 2 years ago, and she was our housekeeper, but she was so much more than that. She was like my mum, and I think it's thanks to her that I'm kind of vaguely sane. So I'd have Mrs. A, I'd have Mick Toulson, who kept the stables where I used to go and ride. And then I'd have my children, obviously, my husband and my sister and her husband, and my cousin Toby, and all my gay friends. It's turning into a bit of a party, actually.
Anyone you look up to? Any icon of history?
Oh, it doesn't have to be people I know.
No, it could be in people you'd love to have met.
Oh, I'd love to
historical figures.
There is someone. I'd love to have Robert Falcon Scott.
Mm-hmm.
I'd love to have had him. I'd love to have Ranulph Fiennes, who I've never met. I'd love to have.
I can make that happen.
Oh, can you?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Okay, thanks. I'd love to meet him.
Okay.
I'd love to have Maria Callas.
Why Maria Callas?
Another extraordinarily outwardly strong woman, but very vulnerable inside. And I just think people like that who project something that's so different from the truth of who they really are is really fascinating. I think it's good to have people who are tricky. I love a challenging person.
And soundtrack that would sum up your decades of your life?
Impossible. I love music so much. Maybe She's a Rainbow by the Rolling Stones. That'd be quite nice.
That's such a wonderful way to end this.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Susannah, for coming.
Amazing. Thank you so much,
Thank
Catherine.
you. If you've enjoyed listening to today's show, you can hear more episodes by clicking follow or subscribe wherever you're listening to this, or by looking for the Third Act podcast in your favourite search engine. This episode was produced by Pete Norton and made possible by Orions, luxurious residences that are redefining later living in the heart of Chelsea. I'm Catherine Fairweather, and I look forward to seeing you in a fortnight for another episode of the Third Act.